Um, Welcome, everyone. This is a conference that is digitally synchronous and asynchronous. So you'll see some people, other people you don't see. But overall, it's recorded and people access into different time zones. It's just after 6:30 in India. And I know that for Kayla, it's morning after 8 o'clock, and Bill, who wakes up very early, it's not that early for him. But welcome to the Tourism and Leisure Studies Conference. The focus is on built environment and design excellence. And why we looked after it is that during the pandemic, it became quite evident the kind of built environment was not necessarily compatible for the needs when people are isolated, when they're locked in, and also people when they're not able to go out, they had to find recreation in their local communities, which they're not used to. People drive to different places, so it became a different issue. So that's why we're focusing on this particular theme. Now we will start off with a welcome from Eric Folt. Eric was the former ADG of UNESCO and United Nations in New York. He's the head of the office for India, Bhutan, Nepal, and Maldives and Sri Lanka. And he's a strong cultural advocate, if you will. I mean, it's wonderful to have somebody like Eric, who really a champion of the cultural dimension of sustainable development. Okay, now over to Eric. There's no sound, Kayla.
Sorry?
There's no sound. You'll have to start again with sound.
Sorry. Let me unsure. Is the sound working now?
No.
That's strange. I'll try it again. The sound is still
no sound.
Oh, that's strange. Okay.
And leisure.
Is it working this time?
In fact,
you can start from the beginning.
Yeah, sorry.
Good afternoon, and thank you for inviting me to speak at the inaugural session of the International Conference on Tourism and Leisure Studies. In fact, I wish I could have joined you in person, which would have been my second trip to the Muziris area. I was indeed fortunate to visit in late 2018 and came back with great appreciation for all the efforts accomplished by many to preserve and promote the history of Muziris. And from an institutional standpoint, of course, UNESCO and the government of Kerala are happy to cooperate together on the Spice Route initiative and highlight the historical and cultural heritage of Muziris. Ladies and gentlemen, the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, which is the roadmap for human progress accepted by all governments of the world, is a little weak, in my view, when it comes to culture, but it does recognize that culture can contribute to economic growth, the creation of sustainable communities, as well as sustainable consumption. UNESCO, for one, as the leading United Nations agency with a mandate on culture, proposes to better unleash the power of culture and creativity to not only create cohesive communities, but to also link culture to livelihoods, to prove that culture can and does serve as a foundational basis to lasting growth for all, helping to leave no one behind. Culture in its myriad forms is a critically important tool for economic growth and development. And to discuss its contributions today is particularly relevant and timely, since in India and worldwide, the cultural sector has been massively affected by the pandemic. The impact of COVID-19 has been felt, as we all know, in all venue-based activities like museums, theaters, cinemas, and other performing locations. But it has also impacted what we at UNESCO call intangible cultural heritage, and which relates to social practices and festivals, as well as traditional craftsmanship. A recent UNESCO publication showed clearly that the destruction left in the wake of the pandemic has had far-reaching consequences for all socio-economic structures, but especially so for the art and culture sectors. The already precarious positions of the practitioners of these industries were further exacerbated by disruptions in the entire creative value chain, leading to unemployment and a drastic loss of revenue, at least 20 to 40% globally in 2020 alone. So the past 2 years have driven, I think, the point home very clearly and with urgency that our world's most pressing problems can only be tackled when we come together as people. I truly think that the 2 years of the pandemic have really changed the way we as individuals think about and interact with the world around us. It has fundamentally altered the ways in which governments and civil society stakeholders design policy that will benefit the largest cross-section of society. In the case of India, for the field of culture, an increasing source of revenue generation in the pre-COVID period was the sector of tourism. And like everywhere else around the world, the declines were dramatic. International estimates ranged from 60 to 80% in terms of decrease of visitor arrivals in 2020 alone. And as tourism returns to India, and as we look forward to the rejuvenation of the hospitality sector, it is now a moment to imagine and create the change we need. What I would like to argue today, as I often do, is that much more investment needs to be placed on the living heritage of India's diverse communities and therefore on its intangible cultural heritage. We need to better link traditions to livelihoods. And we at UNESCO have tried to develop this principle in a variety of ways, in very practical ways. Our current flagship program is the Rural Crafts and Cultural Hubs project in West Bengal, which is realized in partnership with the government of West Bengal. And our other flagship project is also in the same field to promote cultural tourism in Western Rajasthan, this time in partnership with the government of Rajasthan. In the case of West Bengal, our intervention aims to impact 50,000 rural craft practitioners and is oriented towards livelihood generation. The project is targeted at not only strengthening the traditional skills of rural artists, but also their understanding of cultural enterprises and entrepreneurship. It comes also with an attempt to bring visitors, tourists essentially, Indians and foreigners, to the cultural hubs we have created there. In Rajasthan, we have been identifying and promoting experiential, sustainable tourism destinations that will draw from thoughtful itineraries and take visitors through various sites where intangible cultural heritage is practiced authentically. These are all performing arts and craft-based village clusters. These two partnerships have already begun to yield a lot of results that span far beyond the realm of economic growth and also ensure the well-being of the communities where we have based our projects. I have really no doubt that the same can be done in Kerala, in and around Musirisa and beyond, so that not only archaeological and other remains of an illustrious past can be honored and celebrated, but where tourism can be linked to the present and the many facets of intangible cultural heritage that the state has to offer. In addition to the two interventions I just mentioned, I also want to highlight our partnership with the Indian Hotels Company Limited, that is the name of the group of Taj and other hotels, which also shows how the private sector can contribute. In just a couple of months ago, we launched this novel partnership with IHCL, which offers visitors to Taj hotels the unique opportunity to visit sites where living heritage is practiced. This allows the tourists to foster an appreciation for indigenous crafts and cultural practices while providing practitioners the chance to generate an income. I don't want to go on and on, but the message I would like to convey today is fairly simple. The pandemic deprived us of human contact. And now we have to make sure that this aspect is never forgotten. Aside from showcasing the past through monuments, museums, and the like, as we should, we must also find a way to better promote human traditions, many of which are dying or in danger of being forgotten. They must be placed at the center of all cultural tourism initiatives with the full involvement of local communities as equal partners of development. This is the only way forward in the post-COVID world we look to invent. Beyond economic gain, the advantages of livelihood projects based on intangible cultural heritage are manifold and will offer many dividends. Of course, they will serve as a source of decent work for younger generations of women and men who, in turn, will proactively choose to remain rooted in their cultural context. They will then proudly perpetuate cultural traditions and ensure intergenerational transmission. This is what will allow communities to remain intact and guarantee that youth remain in these communities instead of migrating to an uncertain future in the cities. This is clearly a win-win-win propositions. Dear friends, cultural preservation is essential to the formulation of a blueprint for sustainable growth and development. Growth, however, can only be sustained and consolidated when we keep people at the center of our imagination. Yes, let us formulate human-centric developmental policies in tourism too. After close to 2 years of living in the shadow of the pandemic, we are fortunate that we are closer to normalcy today. As the pandemic ebbs and we try to return once again to life as we know it, we must come together to rebuild that which was lost and to do it differently and better. I wish you all the best for the upcoming conference.
Thank you, Eric. That's inspirational and to the point inaugural address. And by the by, to the participants, we're not introducing the speakers because you got their bios. Their bios have been online for some time. And Eric is not able to continue because he has got other obligations. But however, I think that since you're all registered, you can listen to it again if you wish. What he's saying, which is very succinctly about the Agenda 2030 and Sustainable Development Goals, and how in the post-pandemic situation we could integrate, what we are doing, but most importantly, put people at the center. They're not just statistics, they're not just numbers. That's his point. All right. Okay, now the next keynote address was going to be by Dr. Ananoya Chaube, Provost, Anand National University. He's had a family emergency, fairly urgent situation. So he's not able to join because he's had to go to hospital. So in summary, I'm going to present his points. Post-pandemic, the key questions that Dr. Chaube was going to address is the context of the post-pandemic India, the world, the context of new educational policy, because India adopted just before the pandemic a new national education policy for the first time in 36 years, one of the most progressive in the world. While in my own country, like Australia, humanities are being, slaughtered in terms of budgets and faculties and everything. India has increased its budget for humanities by nearly 400%. And why is this? And what Dr. Annoya Chaube argues is that whatever discipline you teach in, whether it's architecture, whether it's design, whether it's planning, you can no longer continue in silos. This is within the framework of the National Educational Policy, which talks about interdisciplinarity, almost mandatory, if you will. And so beyond the silos, you can no longer do that. The second thing is that in his own institution, Dr. Chaube, the Anand National University has started something very innovative. You have a faculty of architecture, you have a faculty of design, but there's a faculty of creative practices and entrepreneurship that's being established with a range of innovative centers, which all aspire to become centers of excellence. Why is this? I mean, this is actually humanities and social sciences interfacing with architecture and design and planning to soften, if you will, the edges, the harsh edges of architecture, and to soften the edges of design. You need humanities, you need social sciences. That is the whole idea. And for example, online, you'll hear tomorrow from Professor Diti Vyas and Professor Subbalakshmi, Professor Vanessa Gauri-Shankar, some of the faculty in the School of Creative Practices who are dealing with responsible tourism, gender and living heritage, and cultural economics and entrepreneurship. All these interfacing with architecture and design. Now, the other thing is that something India has introduced, which Dr. Chaube pursuing vigorously, is the measures of credits and the portability. Because the new education policy advocates for portability. That means people can study, for example, at one university in Australia for one semester going from India, or they could come from there to India. But it's not just actually a semester cultural exchange or student exchange like in the past. It's far more than that. It's actually taking credits and building your credit bank. So students will be able to do that. The systems are being put in place. And the third thing is that Dr. Chaube is very keen and has been advocating that creative practices, whether it's Eric just talked about craft hubs, for example, whether it's performance, whether it's theater, whether it's living crafts, all of this, whether it's storytelling, whether it's lullabies, you'll hear, we have an expert on lullabies as intangible heritage online with us, Professor Diti Vyas. All of this interface. Now, if you look at design is to improve life in one line. And life can be improved in different ways, but in the post-pandemic situation, in the built environment where people have been isolated during the pandemic, how does one actually design the places to improve life? How does one bring back creativity? How does one bring back those elements of intangible heritage in that space? So these are the lines of argument of Professor Chaube in his visionary approach to develop the Anant National University, which is a national design university. And I regret that he's unable to join due to family emergency. However, I'm able to share some of the points. Now, one of the things that Anant has done in this interdisciplinary approach to post-pandemic education is to really expand blended learning in such a way to produce solutionaries. That means people coming from diverse disciplines, could be engineering, could be architecture, could be English literature, it doesn't matter. They're able to come together into a fellowship program. Now, I think right now there are people from 9 different countries in the fellowship program to create a space in which there is a very rich and exchange of ideas and cross-fertilization to think about the ways and means, the way we deal with the future challenges, because it's no longer, sort of projects funded where, sort of architects get the bid, they do project manager, they deal with the built environment mainly from the architectural point of view, but there is a context for it. It's that context is what the scope, as it's called, School of Creative Practices and Entrepreneurship, which is a brilliant idea of Dr. Chaube, where people are able to engage with the context. Whatever we learn, there is a context. And you need to understand the context. You need to have, how do you gain empathy? How do you gain insider perspectives of whatever we're dealing with, whether it's design or built environment? And these and many other ideas, but also in the post-pandemic tourism, which has continued to be the fastest growth industry before the pandemic and will no doubt, as Eric anticipates, will come back with a bang. And already there's a high level of competition to attract the tourism dollar. In a country like Australia, states of Queensland, Victoria are actually giving huge concessions for people who want to travel out of the cities into the country areas, and to encourage people to travel differently in the post-pandemic times. And so what does an Anant academic or a student or fellow think about the built environment in post-pandemic? Is it more of the same? And remember, Ban Ki-moon, the former UN Secretary General, emphatically said with sustainable development goals that more of the same will not do. So how does one actually look at the future? How does one move forward to the future? What does design itself mean? Design where you put people at the center. In fact, the Secretary of the Smithsonian at another conference hosted by Common Ground Research Networks called the Inclusive Museum Conference in Philadelphia, where Anant National University is a partner, emphatically said it's no longer being people-centeredness, but being with the people. That means it's no longer the museum engaging with the communities, but the museum being located in the communities. How do you do it? Given the digital affordances, given the range of possibilities that are there to curate and design. So these are some of the issues and challenges that Dr. Chaube is addressing, encourages his faculty, and very young faculty, may I say so, which means that there's intergenerationality, the next generation perspectives that are brought in. So this is the future of higher education. It's almost imperative that it's interdisciplinary. It's imperative that it's blended. It's imperative that it is collaborative. What Dr. Chaube means is collaborative learning and teaching. It's imperative that it's no longer rigid and competitive, but it's cooperative between the universities, putting the students, the learners, if you will, at the forefront rather than the teachers and the institutions. And so Anant, what Dr. Chaube is leading at Anant is a model university that is going to maximize on the new educational policy of India and look to a future where we produce, the future citizens as solutionaries and dealing with contemporary challenges as we move forward. I think that's as far as it can go from his conceptualization, his points. Are there any questions? Because I think Kayla, we still have another 10 minutes, right?
Yes,
Or have
we
we
do.
finished? We do. So if anybody, unless Dr. Venu Vasudevan is online, is he online? Dr. Venu, are you there? Or Professor Stephen Lefman? No, they're yet to log in. They're our next speakers. So are there any questions? Anybody wants to ask questions? I can do my best to answer on behalf of both Ananuya, but also possibly Eric as the UNESCO chair. Somebody has got a question. Hello, has anyone got any questions? You can type it in the chat box if you will. Okay, well, if there are no questions, let me ask you all a question. Can you type in your chat box, how do you think your future idea of tourism, where you want to travel, your bucket list, if you will, how you want to, invest in your recreational time? Can you type in the chat box, what are you going to do that's different from before? Okay, there's some people that are typing in. Diti, you've just come back from a fantastic time in the Himalayas. Diti, are you there? Can you unmute yourself, please?
Yes, Professor Gal, I'm very much here.
So tell me, what was it like going camping, trekking, and doing all the things that you do before the pandemic, and what was it like doing it post-pandemic in the last 3 weeks?
Right. So one of the things was our selection of the destination was based on the potential, the probability of meeting lesser people. So we decided to go to destinations which were non-marketed destinations, which were more within wilderness, with the local communities, with being frequented by less number of people. So just to give an example, we decided to go to a village called Satri in Uttarakhand, which has only 5 inhabitants. And it was very, very fascinating the way the ecosystem worked, the way life happened in a community way for those 5 people, the interconnections between people who are staying up on the hill and people who are living down there. So one of the things, as I mentioned, was seclusion and solitude that we were seeking. Secondly, this also took us away from the structured way of living in hotels and starred accommodations. We this time preferred to stay in homestays. It somehow psychologically felt better, safer, to live with the locals who are not exposed to a lot of tourists. So that was that. Also, in terms of eating, we explored a lot of local cuisine. So we ate what the locals did, and I must say that all of this made the entire experience extremely deep. It was so grounded in the entire ethos of the place. We did not go as we went as outsiders, but we gradually got absorbed in the fabric of the community life there. Helped dousing the forest fires, walked with little children to these places where the inhabitants had migrated, tried understanding why the migration happened. So it was all in all extremely fulfilling, I must say.
No, fantastic, Diti. That's wonderful. It's no longer planned and organized visitation, but it's experiential visitation through exploration and very participatory. So thank you very much. So Mushan, you want to go to South India. Why South India? Unmute yourself, Mushan. Mushan is from Iran. She wants to go to South India. I don't think you have unmuted yourself. Well, let me ask. Oh, okay, no worries if there's a lot of noise. Let me ask, we have a wonderful person online, Professor Roma, who just moved back to India after I don't know how many years. So, Professor Roma, are you online? Can you unmute yourself? She was online. Oh, there she is unmuted, but we can't hear you, Professor Roma. Professor Roma Madan Soni. She's an artist and curator, but we can't hear you. Professor Roma, we can't hear you. You unmuted, but your sound is not working. Can anybody else hear her?
Hello, Professor. Sorry,
We can hear you now. Now tell me, Professor Roma, you've just moved back to India after a long time, and what does it mean, sort of for you, post-pandemic traveling and visitation? If you were to, are you planning to? I know you're going to move to Ahmedabad, but if you're planning to travel, what's your main focus post-pandemic? How would it be different from before the pandemic? We lost you again. So Shri, you say that experience as a traveler, not as a tourist. What exactly do you mean?
Yes, by that I mean that as a tourist, I would have gone only to the pretty places that are meant for the brochures and all of the more famous places. But as a traveler, I think I would go through the the narrow lanes, experience the, the life and the experiences of the local community, possibly interact with people or not interact with each other and just be, within nature. That would be my idea.
Yeah. So Ayushi, how are you going to find places that are not in promotional websites, etc.? How are you going to find them to match your interests?
Maybe by staying in these places for longer than usual and probably encourage spontaneity. I mean, just stay back at the cities or at the smaller towns and through verbal conversations go from one place to another as opposed to planning everything so tight and structured before even reaching the destination and not leaving any room for exploration.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Professor Roma, that one of the challenges is power cuts, I guess. And so, Abida, what about you? Abida Helal, what would travel mean to you post-pandemic? Abida, can you unmute yourself? All right. Here it is. Slow travel. What do you mean by slow travels? I'm used to slow cooking, slow eating, slow everything, slow thinking, but slow travel. What do you mean by slow travel, Deeti? Professor Deeti Vyas is advocating for slow travel.
Professor Galla, what I mean by slow travel is not making any checklists before we plan our trip. As Ayushi mentioned, not sort of staying longer for at a particular location before moving out, and letting the landscape, the people, the stories emerge. A lot of times when we make our checklist, the sightseeing list, and we pack our days by adding a schedule to our trip, we tend to miss out on what is small and minute and apparently invisible. So what I mean by slow traveling is letting be in the moment, and let stories come out, be it people's stories, be it stories from the jungle, be it nature speaking to you. So basically shutting a lot of activity, and this is what I would be also talking in my live session tomorrow, when we see travel, we see it often as a very active, very masculine sort of enterprise where there are things to do, and the more you do it, the better your trip is. Slow travel would be, I would call it, very feminine, very tender, where you are allowing yourself the freedom to get lost, where you are allowing yourself to be found and to find the destination in the true sense.
Thanks, Professor Vyas. That's beautiful, the way you explained it. Chrislian is there from Brazil. Chrislian is from Brazil. Chrislian in Brazil, has tourism started post-pandemic? You're traveling. So what is the difference between travel and tourism before the pandemic and now?
I think in Brazil, the tourism it's getting back, but I see tourism very much linked with festivals and this short and special dates, at least in Brazil, as Carnival and these parties that when people doesn't want to really know the place or the culture, but they want to enjoy parties and something more quick. But travel is more a way to explore and know the people, know the culture, immerse in that culture.
Thank you, Chrislyn. That's wonderful. Anyone else who has got any comments, questions? I'm waiting for the next speaker to join. There's still a few minutes. Kayla,
Hi, Professor.
let me know when the next speaker joins, okay?
Okay, yeah.
Has anyone else got questions, comments? No, everybody's very quiet, and Wi-Fi challenges too, I guess. Well, I tell you what, I mean, pre-pandemic, I used to travel quite extensively all over the world as a technical expert in my expertise. I used to enjoy. Pandemic, I'm stranded. It has a lot of impacts on people's mental and physical health being stranded, especially if you're used to traveling. But then for me, what I noticed very strongly is that if you take a country like India, sorry, someone could everybody mute their phone mics, please. What I noticed is before the pandemic, there was a very large informal sector in India. People who relied, like if you take a major museum, there's so many service providers around the museum or an archaeological site, so many service providers. A World Heritage site in India, so many service providers. I'm not saying it's any different in other parts of the world. I think everywhere the informal sector has been hit hard. In India, people employed in managing World Heritage sites, museums, and so on, they're mostly government employees, and their jobs were protected. But the informal sector, there was no insurance for them. There was no guarantee for them to sustain their livelihoods. So post-pandemic, how the informal sector comes back is really important. What I myself am noticing is, and this is something very serious that everybody has to think about, is the pandemic has given an opportunity for corporates, multinationals and corporates to redo their strategies. So in my own neighborhood, what I'm noticing is where there was informal sector in terms of vegetable vendors, fruit vendors, and so on and so forth, and also the smaller shops, they're all shutting down because they have not been able to survive the pandemic. But what you got is, I won't mention the names of the companies, they're opening up new, stores, new departmental stores, new grocery stores. So in one way, the corporate sector is taking advantage of the post-pandemic situation because the informal sector and the smaller business people are not able to rehabilitate their businesses. And this is really sad because this is not going to help with poverty alleviation as we all want to deal with, but it's actually creating poverty because the rich are getting richer, the corporates are pocketing more money, they're taking over more local businesses. And this is a reality. How does one deal with it? How does one deal with it? I mean, like going to a World Heritage site, for example, traditionally you would have bought something on the roadside to quench your thirst, to eat, experience the local thatched huts, local foods and everything. But now you got new restaurants, which are all chains, more of the same kind of multinationals. Would you make a conscious effort or not to patronize them? Would you make a conscious effort if you can find people in the informal sector? In a country like India, in the cultural area, 83% of people were employed in the informal sector. How are they going to find their way back? How are they going to restart? I mean, these are some of the serious issues that we have to keep thinking about as we go along. We got 2 minutes for our next speaker. Kyla, have you got, Sharvari, if you got Dr. Venuvasadevan's phone number, could you call him, please? Okay, Dr. Venuvasadevan is our next speaker. Dr. Venu is a very special person. In fact, he was the one who authorized the Muziris conference. As he was then the Secretary of Tourism, Culture, and also Additional Chief Secretary of Education. Very experienced administrator. But more importantly for me, he was the former Director General of the National Museum of India. And before that, he was a Joint Secretary who assisted very much with the establishment of Kochi Muziris Biennale. I mean, he was one of the people instrumental in the establishment of Kochi Muziris Biennale. And what inspires a lot of us in the museum world is during the pandemic, instead of bemoaning, the impact of the pandemic, he developed a strategic approach to develop new initiatives. I think there's something like 27 new museums and galleries that opened during the pandemic in the state of Kerala. So we're waiting for him. Just be patient, please. Be there with me. Okay, we might, instead of waiting for Dr. Venu, Professor Stefan Lehman has joined. Hi, Stefan.
Hello, good morning from Las Vegas.
There you are. We're talking about post-pandemic tourism, Las Vegas.
Good to see you.
From Las Vegas. That's so sweet of you to join us. It must be very early in the morning for you.
Yes, it's early morning here. The sun is rising. It's another 45 degrees in the desert. And let me tell you, Las Vegas has bounced back from the pandemic. We're expecting again over 40 million tourists visiting this year. We are strong, and this city is so resilient. It's unbelievable. It's not one of the fastest growing cities in the US. It's also extremely resilient, and it's of course in the middle of the Mojave Desert, as you all know. So we don't have much water. So it's going to be a real challenge to very soon hit 3 million people and running out of water in the next 20 years. So the politicians have put their head in the sand for a long time, but the disaster is coming here. I can see it on the wall. So very nice to see you, everybody, and good to see you, Amar. I hope you're well. And do you want me to speak now?
Yeah, Stefan, we are not really doing introductions because all the CVs have been online for a long time. So this is Professor Stefan Lehman, all the way from Las Vegas, first voice from Las Vegas, if you will. Well, over to you, Stefan. Please, you want to share the screen, right?
Yes, I can do that. We can just have a conversation or host disabled participant screen sharing. Oh, you need to allow me to share my screen, please.
Hello.
Yeah, sorry. I'll fix the setting.
Hello.
Hello.
My God, Stefan, you're getting younger every time I see you.
I wish. I'm
Is the screen sharing working now?
Yeah. Now it's working. Great. Okay. Thank you.
Fantastic.
Can you see any slide? Can you see a slide coming up?
Yes, we can see. Fantastic.
And is it a full picture slide or is it 2 slides? Because I have several screens here. Is it a full picture slide?
Yeah.
So, okay. So thank you for inviting me. I'm an architect and urban designer. So I'm looking through the lens of design, and I call it regenerative design. And what I believe we should do is responsible tourism, healthy, green, and climate resilient. And I'm going to talk 30 minutes as you asked me to do. First, give an introduction to the topic of mass tourism, why it is destructive, what's the problem about it, and what is responsible tourism, and how could we overcome the challenges of mass tourism and the role that regenerative design might have, reconnecting us with nature. So important. We are so disconnected from nature all the time at the computer screen in the office. And then how regenerative design could be applied for tourist facilities so we do not destroy what we love, the basis of the tourism, and then looking ahead with some reflective thoughts and consider what if. And of course, then I'm available for any questions you might have. Of course, the common images you all know in the cities, on the beach, in the landscapes, in the museums. English seaside village Clovelly in Devonshire is now charging £8.50 per person for entrance. But there are also fantastic successful examples. Here you might know this project. It's the reuse of an abandoned quarry in China, in Zhejiang province, where they kept the intervention to the minimum and they avoided the danger of over-design, a fantastic new tourist facility. But that's basically the problem when we go to other places in China. We have, of course, a huge appetite to go and have authentic experiences and find those unique landscapes and cultural landscapes and places. We call it ecotourism today, but this, of course, a lot of it is greenwashing, as you will know. For instance, in the Maldives, every resort on every tiny island is ecotourism, but sometimes those bungalows overwhelm the size of the tiny island and destroy the reef. Their lack of regulations is posing a huge challenge to those small islands and their sensitive ecosystems. And behind the scenes, of course, we have an overshoot of limited carrying capacity of those islands, mountains of waste, overuse of resources, loss of biodiversity, and so on. So why is mass tourism so unsustainable, which we have become so acquainted to? First, we see everywhere now an increase in the number of enterprises claiming to be green, green tourism, but it's of course based on the consumptive system of mass tourism that is at its core unsustainable and destroying the cultural identity and the ecosystem, and it doesn't make actually good business sense. Mass tourism doesn't make good business sense because it applies, again, the old model, industrial model of consumption that was developed for selling cars or consumer goods. And now the commodification of this unique, authentic experience that we are all after is leading to over-tourism everywhere. And there are only a limited number of places that are rich in scenic beauty and authentic culture that are left. So there is a conundrum. The promise of cheap travel and adventure is unsustainable because it destroys exactly the natural cultural landscapes on which the tourism system depends. And many regions are so much dependent on tourism. The primary income source is tourism for employment. So it's a very fragile system that is always should always be diversified. So at the end, more and more tourism means actually less benefits to the host community. It's not about quantity, it should be about quality. And there is a new way to look at the economics of tourism. Very interesting. I just want to touch briefly on Kate Raworth's donut economics. Many of you will know it. It's a new economic model that has developed in the last years that is looking at the environmental and human well-being, not just at the monetary gains. And it looks at the ring, at the donut, and shortfall and overshoot. And it's a good new way to understand the problem of tourism, I believe. But the question that arises here, of course, is who owns the city with all these cultural artifacts and unique landscapes, like a place like Paris, for instance, or Venice or Barcelona? Who is the public? And what about the public space network? Well, probably one of the most relevant architectural and social issues we are discussing in architecture at the moment, the public space. Public space has changed a lot. As you all will know, public space, you looked very different before TV and internet. It looked more like this, where kids played on the road and people were, all generations were together. And now with the pandemic, we became again more aware how important our public spaces are, and gardens especially. But the question I want to pose, a little bit provocative, is have we forgotten how to design beautiful cities and public spaces? If we look at the 3 largest new private urban developments that have been built recently, in New York, Hudson Yards, here in Vegas, the city center, the 2 largest private developments in the US. And for instance, London Battersea Power Station, you all will know, along the River Thames. Despite that more than $10 billion was invested in each of those, they are very hostile public spaces between glass towers. Urbanistically, most people would agree it's actually a complete failure. And why can't we design beautiful cities and public spaces like we used to? And now we go and marvel and appreciate and look at them, and we go back in time to visit those places, and then we return to our ugly buildings and hostile spaces that we think is inevitable. And so it's very interesting, because if you look at all those wonderful urban areas, from small cities to medium size like Bilbao, Bordeaux, or large cities like Paris or Madrid or Mumbai, the streets and parks and often the entire downtown areas have a way to dignify the individual, but it's not about the individual. It's not the goal. The goal is the civic, the communal. It's the shared public space that is so important. That is what dignifies and civilizes us. And city tourism, of course, is booming and going to those places. Barcelona is celebrated for its beautiful walkable public space and its compactness, attracting us to wander these old cities, explore the streets, the squares, the gardens, and marvel at those textures that seem to be impossible in new developments like the ones I showed before with those glass towers. We seem to be unable to replicate what we all actually like, and we flock to those cities, adore them, and we're interested in those beautiful buildings and places, and then we return to our soulless towns. And that seems to be a conundrum, seems to be very weird. So, and also, why is there such a disregard for nature? Where does it come from, actually, those this idea, this thinking that nature is a free resource to be exploited? It goes back to René Descartes' belief system from the 17th century, where he pointed out that humans are supposedly superior to exploit nature, like in the diagram on the left, whereas we should look at the holistic closed loop system, as the diagram on the right shows, where we understand humanity and nature are not separate from each other. Humanity is not dominating, it's not there to dominate, but to be part respectfully of the same ecosystem. So we have to reverse those philosophical ideas that emerged over the last 200-300 years, invented by people like Descartes. So we have to identify the real issue. One is the loss of biodiversity and species extinction, big concern, of course. And also the way we build, we keep building, urbanize, sprawl, destroying landscape, eating away and taking away a lot of the beauty of those cultural landscapes, because we lack urban growth boundaries. And we also have the problem that we have the location of jobs over here and people living over there, and rising health costs and a lot of commuting going on. So the way we have built our cities, many of our cities have been built wrong, and we have an outdated urbanization model. And so me and my team, we are looking at other different urbanization models for the last 25-30 years. One of them is density without high-rise. Another one is the city of short distances. Another one is the idea of the zero-waste city. So we developed all those different theoretical conceptual models of cities, of course, based on the Goal 11, Sustainable Cities and Communities, of the SDGs you all have. And we know, of course, for many years that global warming is increasing, temperatures are increasing, caused by CO2 levels in the atmosphere and methane going through the roof. We've known that, and we kept pretending as nothing would happen when the forest was on fire right next to us. So the question is always coming up at that point is how much time is left to make sure we keep global warming within 1.5 degrees Celsius. And a lot of experts agree that action has to happen within the next 10 years and before we reach a tipping point. So we are probably 10 years away from this tipping point. And now there is the question, how do we really make a joint effort of all nations to ensure we can keep 1.5 degrees Celsius global warming limit as a reality. And now we understand more and more that sustainability is not enough to do this. We actually need regenerative design that goes beyond sustainable design. It looks at reversing and repairing the destruction caused by rising temperature. And regenerative design thinking is about reversing the negative effects of climate change, not just trying to be sustainable and do less damage, but actually restore and repair those damaged natural systems using renewable energy systems, of course, but also waste-free closed loop systems and principles to protect the ecosystem. We've done a lot of publications on that, looking at the principles of green urbanism, low carbon cities, growing compact urban regeneration. Many books were published on that topic. So what could be the alternative? How to move towards a conscious travel of responsible tourism is the question. And travelers are in search of an authentic nature-focused experience today. For instance, now people come to Las Vegas not just for the Strip, they actually come here to visit the Red Rock Canyon, the Valley of Fire, Death Valley, those kind of amazing desert ecosystems that they go to, or Mount Charleston. It's very interesting because people are coming, guests are coming to be healed and transformed. So the future is not more, but authentic, climate resilient, meaningful tourism. And that's very strong here now in between the big players, MGM and others, Sands and so on. You all know those big players in the tourism field that are running parts of the Strip. They understand that there needs to be authentic experiences, and a lot of it is nature focused. For instance, very popular, the day trip to the Grand Canyon from here is always completely booked out. And but we also need design excellence that is based on regenerative tourism, not to destroy what we love. We have moved away from being part of nature, from being apart from nature, Sir David Attenborough says. So very interesting. And those places are not there to just be exploited, but these are sacred places to be protected, celebrated for their uniqueness. So we need to understand that. My architecture firm, SI, Stefan and Igor, my partner, business partner, Igor, is based in Dubai and Barcelona, and I'm based here in Las Vegas, and we have offices in 3 cities. SI Architecture and Urban Design, we are working globally on projects in Asia, Australia, US, and of course in Middle East in different areas. And one of our areas is hotels, resorts, and tourism. For the last 30 years, we've done a lot of urban design, and we're looking at understanding public space better and the urban collective realm. What does it mean? And we always study public spaces first before we put any buildings somewhere. And for instance, the flaneur, the idea of the flaneur that has emerged in 19th century literature is very, very interesting to us. And this is what you get when you leave the public space to a traffic engineer. That's the kind of public space when urban designers are not involved. It's very important that you understand in terms of tourism and public space that leads to the tourist attraction. Public space belongs to all, but we have to stop designing it in a way that thinks everybody's 25 years old and athletic, because we have to make public space for the elderly. How do they want to meet? How do they want to sit and rest? And what do they appreciate? Or the kids, how do kids, young people, children, child-friendly, age-friendly public space? Very, very important, designing for all spaces. We see also how the traditions have changed. When I visit Indian cities, very much photo I took of a group of women meeting, but now it's becoming more and more difficult with the change impact of traffic and air pollution in Indian cities. It seems like we are moving backwards. 1840, the street profile, 1980, small cars parked close to the curb. Now, large SUVs don't park close to the curb anymore because they are concerned it might scratch their alloy wheels, expensive alloy wheels. So actually we get less cars on the roads today, and the bicycle and the pedestrian have been moved out and pushed out. Now we're reclaiming public space everywhere in those beautiful cities. We see a huge trend towards cycling and walking in places like Amsterdam, Copenhagen, Stockholm, and so on. And we're moving towards the polycentric city, a cluster of polycentric, not monocentric cities. And then how are those clusters and sub-centers interconnected by efficient public transport that moves the tourists and the visitors around in a city from one place to another? And the green space and appreciation of riverfronts for formal and informal activities, but also understanding how places can change and not say, oh, it cannot happen here. It's not true. I've seen it happening, and we're working now in Riyadh in Saudi Arabia on a place where we look at the downtown urban centers and the regeneration of the different downtown areas of an 8 million people capital city of Saudi Arabia, Riyadh. And we keep looking at what happened in other cities where they took out the car parking and they put in big pavements and street trees for shade. Continuous shade is so important in cities like Riyadh or Dubai, and also bring back the light railway or cycling and walking, making walking more pleasant and safe, and taking out the traffic, pushing back the traffic happening everywhere. Madrid, Barcelona, Paris, London, and so on, Milan, everybody's doing it. But also understanding the interplay between higher densities and the danger of the urban heat island. We do a lot of research on that. We did big studies for Australian cities and now US cities here. Las Vegas is sadly the fastest warming city in the US. We are warming by far faster than any other city in the United States. And the second is El Paso in Texas, but there's a big gap. And then there are other cities like Phoenix, Arizona, and so on. But Las Vegas has the sad record holding of the fastest warming city in the US. It's a big, big concern. We have a huge big urban heat island here, and cities are getting hotter in their core. They become baking ovens. You just had a heat wave in India, of course, that caused mortality to a lot of people. So what are cities doing to reduce the air pollution and keep the cities cool? There are many things that can be done. Green roofs. We see here, for instance, in Mexico, something that has been tried in Bangkok. Every infrastructure is then getting a green wall. We are mapping a lot of the heat in those cities, the storing of the heat, and what are the problems. How do we get back to repair and restore the regenerative design with water bodies and green roofs and making clean air, creating better urban microclimates, looking at shadow and humidity and flood control and biodiversity, and bring back what's called ecosystem services that have been lost, and looking at rooftop gardens and urban farming. Let me just move towards, before I come to the end, to show you one case study of what I'm working on right now, introducing my regenerative tourism project in Costa Rica in Central America. I have a project there on the Pacific Ocean that is nature focused. What we are doing now is all about wellness, putting health and wellness at the top of our tools for better urban design and responsible tourism. Most of you will know Costa Rica is an amazing place. It has a tropical climate. It has a rainy season and a dry season. It has reverse deforestation. It is a tiny country between the Caribbean and the Pacific Ocean, and it has over 5% of the global world's biodiversity. 99% of its electricity comes from renewable sources, and it has a goal to become net zero carbon. Our site is on the northern part, close to the border of Nicaragua, and on the Pacific Ocean, which is where most tourism happens. And there's huge developments of tourism, usually comes with big resorts and golf courses and so on. We're looking at the precious landscape and ecosystem and not destroying it. This is the site overlooking the ocean, a range of 5 beaches in walking distance, and very famous beaches. And we're looking at the big hill, the mountain, and how can we build there. And we were looking at how do we not destroy what's called Solaris Hilltop. And we're building those buildings on the hill to leave this is the master plan at the moment, where you come with electric vehicles up and where you have your private infinity pool, but we're using solar power. Solaris Hilltop is using solar power for almost everything. Hot water, electricity generation, battery backup, solar powered water pumps, and so on. Everything is run by solar, but we also reduce the dependency on air condition by going back to traditional natural cross ventilation, reducing the mechanical systems as much as possible in this very humid tropical climate. There are limits, of course, to that. When there is rainy season, it's very humid, so we need some base air condition there, but also using low carbon, locally sourced materials and composting all food waste on site. We have electric vehicle charging stations for those golf carts to go to the beach, but also we leave over 30, in fact, 80% of the site remains untouched. And you see here some of those images where we blur indoor, outdoor spaces. We have also technology. We use parametric design for some areas where we use the topography of the landscape for special selected walls, where we have parametric timber walls. So that's a project we're working on right now, where we're trying to do responsible tourism, sustainable lifestyle village. That's all about health and wellness and reconnecting people, repairing and reconnecting also psychologically the tourists, the people that stay there for 1 or 2 weeks, usually to reconnect them with nature and the beautiful biodiversity that is there on site, listening to the birds and go to the beach for surfing and so on. So looking ahead, coming to the end of my keynote, closing reflection, I think what we see is a rediscovery of the urban context everywhere, public spaces and gardens, especially after the pandemic, and the end of the architectural object. We're now seeing much more context-related, carefully inserted densification projects, again, that look carefully at the ecosystem, not to destroy it, but also think about future practice. We see tremendous changes in the economic model. People now talk about a new era, the end of globalization, something we might discuss about, very concerning at the moment, what's happening there, of course. But how are those changes in society and economy changing tourism and impacting our profession as designers and architects, but also your profession as leaders in tourism? And I think architects need to be critical agents of meaningful, positive change to help solving the climate crisis. We are in the driving seat there, building a massive amount of construction at the moment in many countries. So we need to look at reinventing tourism and public space. Public space, of course, is a very precious commodity. It's a key vehicle for achieving sustainable urban development and regenerative tourism. It's not just the monument, it's the public space around, how you get there, how you park the bus, how you move crowds, all those questions. And the outdoor spaces that have now been, again, better looked at and understood after the pandemic. If anything positive came out of the pandemic is, of course, again, recognizing the importance of outdoor spaces, gardens in a post-oil, post-pandemic climate scenario that is all about regenerative design thinking. So the conclusion I would put forward is one of the many things that the pandemic affected was the tourism industry. What it also did is to show us the way to the future, making us rethink a lot of the not sustainable, unsustainable methods that we have got used to. And it's such a privilege to be able to talk to this group today and talk about the future. Thank you so much for listening. And the importance, talking to you about the importance of regenerative design and responsible tourism, all areas that my firm is very much involved. You can, of course, find much more on our websites. It was just a tiny teaser today. And you can always email me also and look at other of my research institutes and so on, if you're interested in this. But yeah, so I see there are a couple of things in the chat.
Stefan, that's inspirational.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. Very inspirational. Just what needs to be heard. Right in the beginning, I mentioned, audience is a synchronic and asynchronic, the presentations and presentations. So this is recorded, and there's so many more people who listen to you. And I myself will certainly use your session for one of the classes next year, because I
Please
think
do
it's
so.
so succinct, so focused. Now
Yeah.
tell me, I will start off. I mean, anyone with questions, please introduce your name, very brief, just the name, and post the questions in the chat box to Professor Lerman.
And I'm happy to provide the PDF of the PowerPoint. I can send it
it's already there. It's already
later
there.
to you.
Common
And you
Ground
can
will do
make it
that.
available.
Stefan,
Yeah.
Common Ground will upload it. So people will have access to it.
Yeah.
Is that right, Kayla?
Yes, we can upload it.
Yeah.
I send
So
it to
that way, not only the people here, but people everywhere can access it. So Kayla will upload it. So that's fantastic. Stefan, let me ask you a question. I think you made a very powerful statement with a very powerful slide. This is what happens to spaces or public spaces when you hand them over to a traffic engineer.
Yes.
Now, the thing is that I have seen that myself in South India, what engineers, what architects, what designers would do without being interdisciplinary. I mean, you're somebody with extensive teaching experience. How would you see, what are some of the elements you like to see transformed in curricular development pedagogy with architecture and design practices or educational system, in the educational system?
In the educational system? Well, you know, I don't differentiate between teaching, research, and practice. For me, it's all one thing, which is first, I want to explain, this is my approach. I do not go into the classroom and give them a wrong idea, idealistic idea that is removed from reality. I have colleagues that, not here, but in other places in the past, that are acting when they go in the classroom and they represent a wrong reality that they might dream of romanticize, and give students the wrong idea and then go away, and then they go into practice and they forget all their ideals and just want to make money in practice. You know, I don't do that. I am, first of all, I want to make clear it's all one thing, and you need to be authentic, and you have to have value-based projects that are based on real values that people can believe in. And you know, you have to be authentic. Very, very important in our world. And I know you many years. You know, and I used to hold a UNESCO chair, and you have the UNESCO chair, which is so important, allowing us to impact. So we are, you know, we need to constantly be at our best. That's very, very important, and inspire the generation, the next generation, and shape them, and be also available. I make myself available to my students all the time, and my PhD students, and so they need me, of course, a lot. And I'm always there for them. It doesn't matter if it's Sunday evening or whatever. And so, because I love what I do, I'm so passionate about it, and I know you and many of our audience are passionate about what you do, and you can make a real change. And you have to show how you lead and what are your values, you know, and then people will follow and will trust you and will believe in you. Very important. And you can make differences and changes. I'm talking now to a very big developer in Malaysia. In fact, it's the biggest developer in Malaysia, and they are building entire new cities, you know, and they got me in to talk to them. And so I just did a big session with 50 developers online in KL, in Kuala Lumpur, talking about those things and inspire them, because some of them, you know, have given up their ideals, and they say, look, there is no chance. I'm just a small wheel in a big big machine, they tell me. And I tell them, look, you count and you're important, each of you. And, you know, we have wonderful people doing great work. And sometimes you have to be persistent, you know, and then that's something we learned through the pandemic. And never give up, of course, but keep believing in your ideals, you know, very, very important. Otherwise, what do you have? Well, you know, what are you working for? You know, what the transformation and the change. And when you do this truly and honestly and value-based, that people can believe and see leadership in action, they believe in you, and they know they can also play their part. and you then empower them. Very important. What is the difference between being a manager and a leader? You know, leadership is about empowerment and setting out the purpose why we are doing it. And also very important, keep repeating. It's almost like preaching to the converted. Every day it's necessary. Every day you keep repeating the key messages again and again and hammer them, even if it's nerving some people and say, oh, we know what you're going to say now. Say it, because you need to clearly define the purpose, and sometimes you need to listen carefully and adjust the purpose, because the purpose is changing, especially in that fast transforming world today. What might have been our purpose before the pandemic is now different, you know, so you need also to be able to learn. So what I say is always stay curious. As a teacher, as a leader, as a person, a decision maker, very important. Never lose your curiosity that you want to learn, and stay open. And lifelong learning, I always believe very strongly in lifelong learning. I learn every day. We never stop learning. I know you too, Amar. We always learn and get better and better in what we do. Very, very important. So never stop learning. It's normal, even if you're a professor or whatever, it doesn't really mean anything, because you're still a student, because things are changing and the world is complex, and we constantly discover new complexities that we still don't understand fully yet. So and keep working on and believe that your work is important. Yeah. So who is the public in the presentation? That's important. Yeah, that's an interesting question. Seo Young Kim is asking. Thank you for this question. I mean, everybody, all of us. That's why I'm so interested in public space and the way public buildings have changed. We are the public, of course, and we can make a big difference here. But I see that a lot of the public custodianship of public space has gone away and has been replaced by private interests. There is a retreat. You know, municipalities don't have any money, their budgets are cash strapped, and they're selling out sites and beliefs, and they withdraw from their responsibility of being the custodian of the public, civic, communal, shared space. And they withdraw from that and they hand it over to the private. So the private sector is suddenly doing things that used to be the realm of the public. And that's a very big concern. A lot of architects are speaking and writing and speaking out about the change, the loss of the public as a client. We used to be representatives of the public, trying to do the best, be good neighbors wherever we put a building to the existing condition. The city will always keep transforming. The cities never stand still. So we need to guide this transformation process in a positive way, that we are not an alien, but a good neighbor in every project we insert in this transformation process that is ongoing. But it's very important that we are supported by the decision makers, and where the money comes from today is all the private sector, and that's a huge concern, you know. So we see that shift already with the neoliberal market that we have got used to in the last 20 years. We have seen a shift away from the public being responsible and the custodian to the private sector taking over and not living up to the expectations. For instance, those large projects that we see everywhere happening now in India too, when they are finished, you go there and they're usually a disappointment. Most of the time, they're appalling and they're disappointing, and they're, you know, windy spaces between high-rise towers, and the space between the buildings is so important. And it has been, most of the time, it has been forgotten and not designed. You know, a great interior somewhere on level 25, but nobody can get there. Only the people that have the privilege to work in this tower, but the space between the towers is the problem, you know. So how can we raise awareness? Roma Madan Soni is asking, how can we raise awareness about the situation at grassroots level so all sectors work collectively? Yeah, very important that we all pull in the right direction and that we find compromises that are fair and appropriate, but also improving the public space. And awareness of the grassroots level is very important. You have a lot of great NGOs and grassroots work happening. You know, without the work of the grassroots, many of those places would have collapsed and fallen over. You know, the wheels would have fallen off already. So there's a constant need to involve those people that have the knowledge at the ground, what they know very well, the community that lives there, and they know very well what's happening, what's going on, and they need to be involved in the participation process and in the decision making. Very, very important, of course. What about the academic sector? Well, the academic sector is involved in that very much. We have the responsibility to lead this discussion and to be fair, almost like referees in a game, you know, in a game of soccer. You know, we have to be the referees that understand where we have to get to and how we get there, and involve as many opinions and people as possible, but then also support the decision makers with the right knowledge. You know, it's a difficult situation, because you also then at some point you have to come to a point where you make a decision. What this public space or this new building or this new tourist facility has to look like, because it has to move forward and will be built. So how do you do that? How do you moderate and mediate this process? And we academics are very good in that, aren't we? Because, you know, we are doing it all the time. You know, I've been leading 3 architecture schools. You might know. I've been leading 2 in Australia and 1 in the US here in Las Vegas. Many years I was the executive director of the School of Architecture in Las Vegas here, which is interesting because we have a lot of different opinions, and you have to moderate 50 grumbly academics that all have different opinions, and they're all excellent in their way. And you have a difficult task if you run an architecture school. You know, it's like running different groups of interest groups, and mediating here and come to a decision, and have to have a process that is trusted. You have to gain the trust, and you have to have the tools to moderate and to ensure participation in a broad base. But then at some point, you're gonna have to come to the point where you make decisions, where you enable and you say, this is what we have learned yesterday, and today it allows us to be at that point where we now can make well-informed, better informed decisions. And this is what we came up with. And this is what I hear from everybody. And let's do it like that and move forward, because this is actually, it makes sense. And these are our principles. And you have to articulate those principles for the decision, how you arrived at the decision, but also how you try to be inclusive, but not dictatorship, and try to come with a logical conclusion out of what you learned, and then make the decision to move forward. Because at some point a budget has to be spent on contractors, on builders, and it has to move forward and has to be built. So contracts have to be signed with companies, and sometimes it's $100 million and more. You know, we had, I've been in charge of $400 million projects, kept me awake at night, because making those, the incredible responsibility that you have to have on your shoulders, but also try to offload some of that responsibility to a core team that you have to surround yourself with. You have to have very good people around you to do this. I'm always trying to have a core of 4 or 5 people that I can trust and I understand, and that I listen to, and I know they if I make mistakes, they are forgiving, and I listen to them and I tell them when they make mistakes, and we work together as a collegial, active, proactive team. But you're gonna have to have this core team of 4 or 5 people if you do big projects. Otherwise you are lost and you cannot do it all alone. Yeah, so that's just some of my thoughts of the lessons I learned over this last 30 years doing this.
Stefan, do you mind staying on for a few more minutes if there are questions?
Happy,
Yeah,
yeah.
that's very kind of you. I myself, I've been an advocate of eco-museology for 25 years.
I know.
I worked on eco-museums in Vietnam, Croatia, and so on. And I was asked some time ago, what is eco-museology? And my reaction was, it's putting the human face to globalization, basically. And I think that you so eloquently and very powerfully and articulated, the need to put the human people at the center again. And I was earlier on, before you joined, I was referring to a recent meeting also held by Common Ground Research Networks in Philadelphia, where Lonnie Bunch, the secretary of the Smithsonian, was the opening speaker. And he basically said it's no longer museums being community-centered, but museums being in the community. It's a big difference. And so are there any other questions?
I
There are a lot of young people here, but I think they're a little bit hesitant. Come on.
I think you're touching on a very important point, is the human scale, you know, being human-centered in the projects is very, very important. And I believe, you know, we need to find architecture that makes us citizens, that can make us citizens, not just consumers. So, you know, I mean, a good urban design and good architecture can make a profound positive contribution to a city or to a tourism facility. And that's why we need design excellence that is regenerative in regard to solving the issues and the challenges, you know. And I always say health and well-being. And, you know, we now have a wellness awareness, and health and well-being must be a priority for us. In every urban design decision should be guided first and foremost by the aim to make us happy and keep us healthy. Why would we do it? I mean, who wants to live in a city that makes you unhappy and sick? Nobody. So, you know, the most important that we have now to recognize is we have to make design decisions and to make the city and our life happy, allows us to be happy and healthy, keep us healthy. It sounds very simple, but those things have been lost in a lot of the things we've been doing in the early 2000s. And now we have regained that. If anything positive came out of that pandemic, you know, I think, and of course, how the health crisis intertwined with the climate crisis, you know, is very interesting. So yeah, happy to answer more questions, to hang around a little bit longer. And then I have to rush to another meeting soon on campus, but very interesting discussion we have. So if you want to put
any other questions, come on, this is your chance, young people. There are a lot of young people here. And I think they,
you know, where we met, we went together to Vietnam. Remember, we had, I mean, this years ago, you know, and I would love to work on a new museum concept of the future with you at some point. I've just been visiting in Dubai, where I have an office. I always look at new architecture, new projects. When I'm over there in the Middle East, I go every 2 months to Dubai and to Riyadh. And I've just been looking at the new project there that has been completed. It's called the Museum of the Future. I don't know if you know that kind of big ring. It's totally banal. It's trivial. I mean, the idea they have of the Museum of the Future is so backwards, and it's so 20th century. And I was wondering, what's the future? I mean, this is not the Museum of the Future. This is the Museum of the Past, you know. And it's absolutely wrongly conceived there next to the motorway, and it's and what it shows, the exhibition and all that. And it came along so pretentiously, and everybody was expecting big things of the Museum of the Future. And it's a huge disappointment to go there and to see what they have done for a massive amount of money, $100 million US dollars spent to get such a project that is already outdated by the day it opened, you know, the so-called Museum of the Future. They need to involve guys like you, you know, to really get to a Museum of the Future. I hope we can work together on something in the future. Maybe.
Oh, look forward to it, Stefan. Absolutely. I think talking of Museum of the Future, Sadat Island is another case, you know, sort of where, you know, they're sustaining the British Museum, the Louvre, and everybody else, you know, providing services, rich consultancies. Actually, who is benefiting from whom kind of question comes up. Sadat Island. And but I think, Stefan, it's inspirational. I think the values, value-driven education, value-driven practice, practice-based research, practice-based teaching, these are some of the key takeaways from your talk. And we need to have the courage to face. I think that, you know, people are caught up, you know, it's like a puppy chasing its tail. You know, people are going round and round without actually facing the reality. And I think that this is, what would be really good is for us to host a think tank. And Professor Bill Cope is online. He's the president of Common Ground Research Networks. He's the founder of Common Ground Publishing, Common Ground Research Networks. And he's at Urbana-Champaign, is where he's based. And like us, he has an Australian background from Melbourne. You're from New South Wales, and I'm from Queensland. He's from Melbourne. And maybe we can think of, I think we need more think tanks which would provide, like your PPT, which will be uploaded by Kyla, could be used, by some of the teachers, some of the practitioners, to ask basic questions. Are we still human? Now, I want to ask you a question. I can't remember her surname. Tatiana, the Mexican architect?
Bilbao, Tatiana Bilbao, yes.
Yeah, Tatiana Bilbao.
Yes.
I saw her exhibition at the Louisiana Museum of Modern Art about 4 or 5 years ago.
Yes.
Where she went, she argued that in the digital designing and architecture, we lose the human touch. And she refuses. She's gone back to the analog. Could you comment on that? I mean, I'm not really an expert, but I was so impressed by that whole direction, and the Louisiana Museum of Modern Art having a major exhibition.
Yeah, and Tatiana Bilbao from Mexico, she's a wonderful architect, rising star. She did the Serpentine Gallery Pavilion in London and many things. And Tatiana, right, of course, I mean, there are two schools of thought. One is believing naively technology will solve and fix it, and we just need technological innovation and we'll be fine. And there's another school of thought that rejects that and it wants to go back to basics and low tech and rammed earth walls and simplicity and collecting rainwater and those things, and very basic, and using natural ventilation. I believe we need a hybrid. I believe more that we need to use the technology where it makes sense. Sometimes less technology is better, the little as we need, but some we need, and we need to combine that. And we need to look at new construction systems. And for instance, now there's a big move to mass timber construction because of the reason that timber stores carbon. But of course, it needs to be looked at in terms of the forestry system. Is it sustainable? Where does the timber come from? We cannot cut down rainforests in Indonesia or Vietnam to produce timber constructions. That's, of course, not a way to go. So we need to combine the right technologies that are carefully selected, that have not too much embodied carbon, embodied energy. Big move at the moment to look at materials in a new way and looking at the embodied carbon. Where is it sourced? Where is the quarry? Where is it manufactured? How is it transported to the construction site? How much carbon has already been embodied by the time the material, the stone, the whatever steel beam, wherever it comes from, is already full of embodied carbon by the time it's on construction site to be put into this construction project. So we need to carefully look at the whole life cycle, and Tatiana understands that very well. But I believe that we need more hybrid. I think just going back to the basics is a good approach, but not enough. We have to have some technology carefully selected that has not too much embodied carbon, that helps us to improve things. And in some climates, like the one in Costa Rica I showed you, we need mechanical ventilation in some times of the year. For instance, at the moment now, it rains a lot there. It's rainy season now. You cannot, the humidity, you cannot live there in the comfort we need to offer today to tourists also, that you get away completely without mechanical ventilation. But you can have a reduced, smaller air-conditioned plant that is only used half the year. You don't have to run the air condition the whole year if you do a lot of correct, that you have cross ventilation by opening the windows and catch the breeze, the prevailing cooling winds the other half of the year when it's getting very hot and it's a dry season, and then you don't need air condition actually most of the time because you don't have this crazy humidity. So it's very interesting to look. Every place is different. What we do in Riyadh is very different from what would work in Kerala. I have shown the Costa Rica project because I believe it has a very similar climate to Kerala. And, I've been in Kerala. I love it. It's so beautiful there. But, you have also this very extreme humidity, monsoon time, rainy season, and tropical climate. So I believe the Costa Rica lessons could be interesting for building in Goa and Kerala and so on. So every place needs its different solutions. What we do here in Desert City, Las Vegas, we are working on an apartment building in downtown in the arts district now, and we're doing very different strategies and principles. We have this as for our regenerative design there. We do away with a car park that is a big urban heat island. It's all black asphalt. There's not one tree. So we take away the asphalt, and we bring back a garden, and on top of the garden, on pilotis above floating, is affordable housing, which we desperately need. We have 100 units coming there in 5 stories, but they're building floats above a public garden where we take out the black asphalt. The worst you can have, of course, is black roof tiles, black facade material, black asphalt, which absorbs and stores and traps the solar heat. Here we have so much sun here, and then you get immediately an urban heat island, of course. And we're trying to fix that by building, but also correcting and restoring and repairing what has been done wrong in a car-dependent idea of planning in the 60s, 70s, 80s, which we now at the point we understand it, and we can repair, restore, and correct those mistakes and actually bring back biodiversity, you know. So
Los Angeles, Costa Rica is a wonderful example. What a contrast. Las Vegas, you're speaking from Las Vegas, talking about Costa Rica. I still remember when we were beginning with advocating for ecomuseology internationally. Costa Rica was a world leader in this area in thinking. In fact, a former president of Costa Rica won the Nobel Prize, who supported, you know, ecological approaches, ecological civilization. So it's fantastic. I know you have to go to another meeting, but Professor Bill Cope, the president of Common Ground Research Networks, he wants to say a few words. Bill, over to you. There he is online.
Good to see you again, Bill. I remember
wait. Bill wants to make Stefan.
Yeah.
Bill wants to make a few remarks. Over to you, Bill.
Yeah, I've lost my voice because I've had a cold, not COVID, but something else. But look, I want to thank you for a really inspiring talk, and these issues are so fundamental today. And I think you're grasping, you know, the practicalities as well as the broader problematic as well. You know, look, how do you deal with these big problems in a practical way? And you know, it was a nice presentation that moved between big picture conceptual stuff and then some really practical examples. So thank you very much. And you know, hopefully the dialogue that you're talking about, this conference is part of that, and with the publication program we have of books and journal articles, this video will become part of the record now as well. So we're building up a body of knowledge. And thank you very much for your really important contribution today, Stefan.
Thank you, Bill. And I wish everybody a successful conference and a wonderful time, and online or in Kerala. My warm wishes to India, and all the best. And thank you, Bill, and thank you, Amar. And
thank you, Stefan. We'll catch up, okay?
Yeah, and let's
thank you, everyone, for participating, and we'll go transition to the next session. Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Stefan.
Everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye. Bye. Kyla, thank you.
Thank you.